All right. Well, this week we are out of February, so we're back to normal episodes. And this week I'm joined by Dr. Lara, who, if you don't know her, she is the founder of the Coaches Collective, which is going to be our main topic of conversation. But Dr. Lara, please introduce yourself and let the people know a little bit about you.
Well, hi. Number one, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to join for just a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am me. I am a clinical psychologist that works primarily with professional and elite athletes, and then the founder of the Coaches Collective, which is a group of ambitious sport coaches that come together wanting to cultivate their craft and expand their expertise, and really level up, in the world of coaching. So those are my two sort of primary sources of where I put my work energy. And I'm also a mom of two wonderful children, and a wife of a wonderful husband. And I love climbing and running and eating pasta. I feel like I gave you like a dating app profile.
All the important things.
I know, right? Exactly.
What's your favorite kind of pasta?
Oh, I mean, listen, I'm just a real big fan of standard angel hair. Like just your
Oh.
average angel hair pasta with like a little bit of sauce, but also like a big slab of butter and some Parmesan cheese.
Are you a red sauce or a white sauce person?
No, I'm a red sauce kind of person, but it can't be too heavy. Like it can't kind of upsets my stomach with like all that tomato stuff. So as long as like the pasta gets kind of pink and red, then we're good. But definitely not like an olive oil and garlic kind of person, because then my stomach really goes bananas. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
That's kind of a shame.
When I was a kid, actually, that's so funny. When I was a kid, I was just remembering my nickname was Noodles because that's like all I would eat was noodles. Like I didn't want anything other than pasta or mac and cheese.
I feel like that's very common in kids, like the noodles with butter.
Oh yeah.
Very classic.
Yep.
Kid
And
meal.
mine was like the blue box of Kraft mac and cheese. Like that would be an afternoon snack for me. Not like dinner, like the entire box was an afternoon snack. Now kids have like apples and peanut butter and like bananas and I was having like a box of Kraft mac and cheese.
I mean, you had to carbo load for all of your activities,
Soccer, basketball, track, all the things. I needed it.
Yeah. Athletics wise, what kind of running do you like? Are you a road runner, trail runner, ultra runner?
Well, I mean, listen, we like to just go all over the place. I am a big fan of trails, but about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, I encountered a mountain lion on a trail. Yeah. Like the backside of it, I came up like behind it and it was big. And I did the absolute wrong thing that you should do. I turned around and sprinted away as fast as possible. Like I probably should have just froze. It wouldn't have even known I was there. And it was fine. Like it didn't chase me or anything like that, but it really freaked me out. And sometimes I like have a tendency towards an anxious response anyway. So I have become sort of a little bit afraid of the trails now, which is so sad because I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, and we have fantastic trails. So I like to basically like run on the road to this area near our house that has a lot of ponds, but I am much less likely to see a mountain lion over there.
Yeah, although, I mean, so I'm in Arvada, which is not close to Fort Collins, but still Colorado. And on rings, sometimes it'll be like, yeah, we saw this mountain lion on our ring just walking through the neighborhood. And I'm just like, excuse me?
I know. My mind has to kind of not go there, like where I have a tendency to run. I have a friend who actually said like, oh, you have to be careful of the other side of the road because there actually are like mountain lions over there. And I'm like, yeah, just not hearing that. But yeah, I can do both. I mean, the marathons that I've run have been on road. And then I've done a few like trail races and things like that. But I do like both. I am well aware that trail running is much better for my body than being on like the road. But I have to get over some fears.
Yeah, I feel like fear is one of the most common things with trail running. Even I haven't encountered a mountain lion, but I've encountered moose. And yeah,
those can be just as scary.
It was so scary.
Yeah.
I'm still traumatized by it.
I mean, it's like there is like that real flooding of just pure terror, like pure terror. Yeah, I do not
Yeah.
like that feeling at all.
Yeah. So let me tell you what happened. So it was out near, it was a trail that goes from Frisco to Breckenridge.
Okay.
And luckily this time my husband was with me. He dropped me off and was picking me up for my run. So like I wasn't completely alone, but I was doing it out and back. And then I was running back to the trailhead and we were like, I was about a mile out. And then I like round this corner and I see something very dark in my peripheral vision. And I turn to look and there's a moose like 4 feet away from my
Oh my
face.
gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
my instincts were unlike yours. They were proper.
Unlike mine that were
Yeah.
completely anti-survival,
Yeah.
yours were actually survival.
I dove behind an aspen, but it was like the smallest aspen known to mankind. So
Right,
if
of
the
course.
moose charged, it would have hurt me.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, then I turned around and there were a bunch of tourists standing there watching the moose because there was like 3 or 4 of them. And this guy was like, that was so funny. And I was like, excuse me, sir, that was my life.
Not funny. Well, it's so funny you say that actually because what happened to me after I saw the mountain lion was I came down from like this foothill and there was a guy who had run past me as I was running up towards the mountain, like where the mountain lion was. And he was running down. And then when I came down the foothill, like sprinting, totally anti survival tactic, he was down there. And I said to him, I was like, oh my gosh, did you see that mountain lion? And he goes, yeah. And I wanted to be like, did you not want to warn me? Like I was literally running towards it. Like, how did you not say something to me? It was had I had maybe less adrenaline running through me, I might have had some tough words with him.
Yeah, I feel like that's common courtesy. I mean, people warn you
Oh,
of snakes all the time.
right? I know. It was very weird and very bizarre. Yeah.
That
Well, and he
is
also
weird.
just didn't seem thrilled with me either. Like I was super, like a little more energetic than he was. He was a little chill.
Oh,
Mm.
that's fair.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you survived the moose though.
I know, but now, like, when I go into the mountains near that area, I'm scared if I'm
Yeah.
alone.
Right. I know.
Yeah,
See, that fear is real.
it is. Yeah. Um, in terms of your professional side, did you always want to go into psychology?
I mean, kind of, yeah. Like, I
Oh.
feel like really one of those lame people that like don't have this very interesting story about like how they fell into their profession. Um, I was in eighth grade, and we did we did a bunch of these projects that sort of like mimicked or not mimicked human behavior, but like explored the concepts of human behavior. Like the one I don't even know if they do this anymore. They probably don't do it anymore, but like where we carried an egg around in a basket for a few days and it was our baby. And like if we dropped the egg, then we failed the project. Like we had to
Oh.
basically treat the egg like it was our child.
Yeah.
And then we watched like a movie called Ordinary People, which, has some pretty sort of heavy psychological pieces to it. And I was just like, this is cool. Like humans are the coolest things on the planet. I mean, I definitely felt like animals might have actually been a touch cooler than humans, that I
Mhm.
thought about becoming like an animal behaviorist, but I really thought that how humans work was just very interesting. So, I mean, it really is as lame as that. Like, I went to college and immediately went into majoring in psychology. And then I knew that, like, I wanted to kind of, go as far as I could go with it, which meant that I didn't want not having a degree to sort of stop or limit me in any way. So then it was just a very straight shot from undergrad to getting my doctorate and then literally doing exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, it's very boring.
That's not boring. That's like
As you say with like the most bored face.
I'm kind of envious of you, just like knowing that. I feel like I
Yeah.
never knew. Also, about your egg comment. We
Yeah.
didn't have to carry eggs. The women had to carry flour, like a
Oh, I've heard this.
flour
Yes.
babies. The
Bag of
men got to
flour.
carry eggs,
That's
which
interesting.
I know. I was like, why don't they have to carry a flour baby on their hip all day? This is a
Yeah,
little
that's sort of
sexist.
weird. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
the egg thing was interesting. But it definitely, that's like what I remember. Like, that's where my mind goes when people are like, have you always known what you wanted to do? It's like something in eighth grade
Hmm.
piqued my interest. So,
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're just one of the lucky ones who
Probably. I mean, I do feel like I have definitely avoided like a lot of career strife
Hmm.
around like really knowing what I wanted to do. And I also feel very, very lucky that what I thought I wanted to do and now am doing, I love so much. Like there are people who like think they want to be a doctor and then become a doctor and they're like, this is absolutely not what I want to do at all. Tons of lawyers feel that way. But I genuinely get so excited about my work. I love my clients like deeply and I love looking at my schedule and being like, oh my gosh, I get to see her today and I get to see him today. And like, I get to do the coaches collective. Like, I just feel very lucky in that way that I love so much what I do. Sometimes I do worry that I'm like setting my children up to feel like this is the norm because I
Hmm.
know it's not necessarily the norm. But yeah, I just feel really lucky about it.
Yeah. Even if it's not the norm, I still think it's a good example to show like you can find something that you do love and
Yeah.
that, work isn't a bad thing. It's something you can
Yes.
look forward to. So,
Yes, totally. And I definitely think I have the balance or they see the balance of like, I love what I do, but I also do work very hard, And
yeah.
so they're like, oh, mom, do you have to work? And I'm like, yes, I absolutely have to work. Yes, I do. Yes, yes. Do you want those climbing shoes? Mom's got to work. So, yeah, they definitely see that hard work goes into also loving what you do. But I do feel like one of the lucky ones for sure.
Yeah. Did you, from the get-go, work with athletes, or was that something that evolved over time?
So, yeah, yes, and sort of no, in the sense that like I went to a graduate program where after just the first month of being there, we were put in clinical work. So we
Mhm.
were put in therapy like sessions where we were doing therapy or working in mental health centers or whatever it is alongside our academic studies. And my first placement was in a college setting, like in a college counseling center. So there were some of my clients there that were athletes at the college. And then after that, I worked at a residential treatment center for eating disorders, which I was
Mm.
also exposed and worked with quite a few athletes in that setting. My like specifically working with athletes didn't happen until about 5 to 7 years ago, maybe,
Hmm.
where I really, for the first 10 years of my career, it was primarily focused on working with individuals who had eating disorders. And, you know, a lot of those were athletes, high level athletes, professional athletes. And, therapy is very much like, a dentist or a gynecologist. I mean, not in what we're doing, but in the sense that, like, you ask someone, like, well, who do you like going to? You ask your friend, like, who's your
Hmm.
dentist? And so, in that way, athletes are friends with athletes. And so, a client might be working with me on their eating disorder, but then a friend might say, like, do you go to a therapist and who do you see? And like, I wonder if she would see me anyway, even though I don't struggle with that. So then I would get a lot of referrals for athletes, but they would indicate like, but I don't have an eating disorder. And I would say, well, I'm more than willing to work with you, but you also have to know that I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist.
Hmm.
So that really sort of opened up the doors for me to work a lot more specifically with athletes. And now that's like primarily what my caseload is.
That's so cool. That's a
Yeah.
cool pipeline.
Yeah. That was very different than like that. I know what I want to do. Like I didn't know that I wanted to work. I mean, I've always been an athlete. Like sports have always been a part of my life. And I truly like love just the aspect of sport. Um, but I did not know that I would love working with athletes as much as I do. So that was kind of a new thing to find out.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you also work with coaches in the coaching collective.
I know. And now I work with coaches and the coaches. So I'm like kind of tackling it from all angles, which is also so fun and delightful. And like really meaningful too. Like I feel like the work that we do in the coaches collective is really meaningful work.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, as is the work that I do in my private practice, but I think there's sort of a different sense when you're building a community, which is what the coaches collective is. And so I really enjoy that. And group facilitation, was also something that I did very early on in my career and continue to do throughout my career. And so being able to hold space for like a group and for other people in that group, to me, I find a lot of joy in that. I think that's really exciting, like the power of hearing, of learning from other people, of like leaning in when you might not lean in a group setting. Like all of those things to me feel really exciting, and I thoroughly enjoy that group facilitation.
Yeah, and being in part of the group, I can tell that from our sessions.
Yeah.
What made you come up with the Coaches Collective?
Yeah. So I had like a few years ago, I was, you know, I'm a big creator. Like I like creating things.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I used to like love drawing and like, doing actual art. But then in my private practice, that felt a little bit more difficult. So I would find myself like creating workshops or, creating groups or things of that nature. And so about 2 years ago, I really wanted to create something specifically for coaches. There's a lot more talk now about the importance of the mind body connection and mental health in athletes. Um, there's just more conversations happening right now about those kinds of things than there were 10 years ago, 15 years ago for sure. But a lot of the time I wonder, after reading, for example, an article, of a football player, let's say, who's identified that like mental health and, working on his mental health has been a tremendous part of his journey. I get to thinking like, well, how does the coach get wisdom and knowledge to like help this football player in that
Mm.
degree? Like, where are coaches going for this material? And I would kind of search on the internet a little bit and talk to other people I knew, and they're like, yeah, I don't really know anything about that. Like I can take some courses on sports psychology, or like get like a few, I don't know, like CEUs from taking different courses on that. But I don't really know that exists. And so I was like, well, okay, this needs to exist. So um, 1 year ago, I just finally said, after thinking about it for 2 years, like, I have to start because I can definitely suffer from analysis paralysis.
Mhm.
And so I was like, if I don't start something, I will be thinking about this forever and like wanting to create something and craving that creation, but not doing it. So that first group, the OG group, the original group, I kind of reached out to a bunch of people and said, "Hey, I'm interested in doing something like this. Would you be interested in joining?" And I was so thrilled with the response. And so that OG group really sort of helped solidify that, like, okay, the Coaches Collective is definitely something that coaches need. And the goal is to, number one, create a space and a community where coaches can come together and learn from each other and be vulnerable with each other and help each other and support each other. And number two, it's a space where coaches can learn from a mental health professional, a licensed psychologist, about human behavior, about how humans work, because coaches are coaching humans. They're coaching the athletic part of the human, but they need to see the human as the whole person. And so, that piece, I feel like, I mean, there are standard parts of the human experience, like imposter syndrome and self-doubt and negative self-talk and um, feelings of fraudulence and anxiety. Like those are parts of the human experience. Those aren't necessarily illnesses or disorders. And so coaches, I think, have an opportunity to lean in with their athletes on some of these more psychological concepts that they haven't necessarily been taught about or learned about. So I wanted to create a space where I could educate coaches more on some of those aspects and how you lean in and have difficult conversations in that arena.
Yeah, and I found it really helpful just learning from everyone else in the group.
Yeah.
And that leads me to another question of like, who is the Coaches Collective for? Because obviously I'm a running coach, but we're not all running coaches in the collective. And it's nice having different perspectives within the group.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the Coaches Collective really is for any sport coach, regardless of age, regardless of sport, regardless of where you are in the world. I mean, right now in our winter intensive group, we have a gentleman in Johannesburg, South Africa, who teaches 11-year-olds Irish dance
Well,
alongside, yeah, alongside like an ultra marathon coach in Montana who's teaching 50-year-olds how to run 100 miles,
Mhm.
and so that blend of diversity in experience, diversity in thought, but also finding the similarity in, shame, for example, and how it's showing up and things of that nature. So, in that way, like I am really interested in changing the coaching culture to coach the whole human and be person centered. And so any sport could use that.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really exciting piece for me too, is to bring coaches together who are all there for a very similar mission, which is to make an impact on their athletes and in some ways transform their athletes' lives and be a part of that transformation. Whether it's an 11-year-old girl who's learning Irish dance or a 50-year-old who's learning how to run 100 miles.
Yeah. Can you give the people a little more examples about like what we talk about in the coaches collective?
Yeah.
Examples of like topics and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. Shame is one for sure. How to lean in with vulnerability. We talk about that. The anxious athlete, the people pleasing athlete, the athlete who's striving for perfection, how to understand your own brand as a coach.
Mhm.
Like how do you embrace what you are giving your athletes and what you want to give them? How do you move them through a transformation journey? Um, we talk about, for example, like connecting for confidence and how do you connect with your athletes to build confidence. In last or this week's actually winter intensive, we went through body image and eating disorders and trauma informed coaching. So it really is a lot of aspects that myself as a psychologist deals with on the daily, but that coaches probably also experience regularly, but don't necessarily feel confident leaning in. And I hear that a lot from coaches in terms of like, I don't know, like, what's my scope of practice here? And like, is
Mm.
it okay for me to lean in? And I think coaches are in a position of power. And power is really just having influence and impact on a human being. Unfortunately, the word power like makes us all bristle a little bit just because of the history of our country. But I do think that if coaches give themselves permission to embrace some of that power and lean into some of these topics and the struggles that their athlete might be having, or just even understanding their athlete more, I think it can give them such a leg up in really being able to coach from an informed position.
Yeah, and I think with all of those topics, it not only helps you when working with your athletes, but I found it really helpful just with like noticing when those things pop up within myself, whether it's my own
Totally.
athletics or within my
Yeah.
coaching, because all of that, you know, is part of every aspect of what we go through. So,
Yeah.
and I think having the group, especially for those of us, like I work alone for myself.
Yes.
So it's like I don't work for someone else with built-in mentors. So it's been really
Totally.
nice just having other people I can go to that I trust because you trust them.
Yes.
And just like building up a network. Because I think that's the other cool thing. Like when we get inquiries that aren't right for us, we have other people we can refer them to.
Yeah, totally. And also, like, I mean, I grew up in not grew up. I grew up in my profession in a team model in the sense that, like, I was in case consultation with other psychologists. Like, I was in group settings learning from other people. When I worked on a hospital, we would round about patients. It was this sort of idea of like, you learn from each other, and that is the best way to grow. And I think many coaches are in the position that you're in, which is where they feel a little bit siloed, like they feel a little bit like they're on their own. And I think having a safe place where coaches can go and feel, yes, that they're going to be in community with other coaches who are there also for similar reasons, but that also it's not a public Facebook group.
Mhm.
It's like people have gone through the program, people are working through the curriculum, and so they're learning all of the same things that you're learning. And I think it feels like this safe place where you can be vulnerable and not only ask for referrals or refer people out, but also ask questions. I mean, ask about like, hey, I have this athlete who just got injured and is probably going to be out for the whole season, and it looks like they might be like really struggling. What do I do? How do I help
Mhm.
them? So I think those kinds of things I think can be really useful in sort of that like community and collective type feel.
Yeah, some of the most helpful sessions that I've felt are the ones where, well, I guess we've only had one so far, but it was like the Ask Us Anything where we
Yeah.
just brought questions and it was
Yes.
like, oh, I'm like not the only person dealing with this with my athletes or like within my business. And that's just like really enlightening.
Yes, totally, totally. Yeah, I mean, just actually last week in the winter intensive on our Thursday session, because the groups are run a little bit differently now than what your cohort experiences. We do like a lesson on Monday, and then Thursday we all come together and we have a full hour basically of like ask me anything and like, discussion.
Yeah.
And just last week, somebody basically raised her hand and said, like, I kind of feel like I'm the only one that goes through this, but I'm just going to say it out loud because I feel like I need some help. And nearly every other coach was like, me too, me too, So it was definitely that feeling of like, oh, I'm not alone here, which I think is just that connective tissue is really important for not only our professional growth, but for our confidence too, in doing the work that coaches do.
Yeah, definitely. I want you to touch a little bit on like getting into the coaches collective
Mhm.
and speaking to some maybe imposter syndrome's the best way to say it, thoughts that
Oh,
people have around it. Cause I know I told you in our first call, I was like, yeah, I saw the OG group and I was like, oh, I don't have much to contribute. I shouldn't apply for this. And then my friend Jess was in it and she was like, no, you should definitely apply for the second one. I was like, okay.
yes,
So yeah.
totally. Yeah, and you are so not alone in that, Kelly, because I mean, nearly almost every application that I've read has said, when I ask, like, what do you feel like you could bring to, like, one of the questions in the application is like, what do you feel like you could contribute to the group? Imposter syndrome comes up so often, like just this feeling of like, I'm not sure, or I haven't been coaching that long, or I don't have that many athletes, or, I'm only an assistant coach at the college. I'm not the head coach at the college. So I mean, the way that the process works, of course, is that you apply, and then I sit with you for a little interview just to get a good sense of your energy. I mean, an application is great and all, and it's a good screening tool for me. But in truth, I'm really interested in like how the person feels, who this person is, what kind of energy they want to bring to the community. So that interview part is really important. But I think that imposter syndrome definitely falls, gets people stuck in some ways. And I think what I need people to know about the Coaches Collective is I don't care if you are literally just coaching and like just even creating a website, or if you've had 20 years of coaching experience, you've coached hundreds of athletes. Like, to me, one of the best parts of the collective is the diversity in experience and expertise. And also, like, if you've coached athletes for 20 years and you've coached hundreds of them, there are probably things that you've done for those 20 years that might need to shift.
Mhm.
Like there are things that maybe aren't working as well anymore that you might need to change. And for you, the coach out there who's like just getting started, you actually have a lot to offer to that coach who's been coaching for 20 years because of maybe the way that you see things, your perspective, what the coaching landscape is right now, and sort of how you see it as a coach. So I think, for me, I'm really looking for a particular type of energy, a particular type of human that knows that they are actually in a position of power, but really wants to use that power for good and wants to empower their athletes. To me, I care way less about your experience and your expertise than I do about your intentions.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I applied, I was very nervous for that reason. 'Cause I was like, I don't know what I have to offer here. But one thing I've learned as we went, like, we met every other week throughout
Mhm.
our session. We have our last one next week, which is really sad. But anyway, um, I've learned that, like, even if I can't relate to the specific situation someone brings up, in a lot of cases, I've had similar situations or like even just someone, if they haven't had experience coaching, they could be like, have you thought about it in this way? And
Yeah.
that's just as valuable as like, oh, I've dealt with this issue before, just like getting
Yes.
you to think about things.
Yes, absolutely. That's 100% right. And I love that you've been able to observe that and see like the power of that. I mean, I think we don't have to have lived experience to relate.
Mhm.
That we can just relate through perspective. I mean, if I think about my clients, for example, like there are so many things that I have not gone through that my clients are going through. And I'm not a good fit for them because I've gone through what they've gone through. I'm a good fit for them because they're curious, I'm curious, and we take a different perspective together. And so I think in the coaches collective, like I think that piece is really important, is that you can sit on a call with a couple of other coaches and there are four different offerings of how to approach something or what to do. And then you as a coach get to pick which one you want to use or if you
Mhm.
want to change at all. But I think the fact that you now have options and different perspectives, it can only level up your game. Like it is only going to help increase your coaching acumen and your skills. But you just have to be vulnerable enough to get there. You just have to be vulnerable enough to raise your hand and say, I want to do that. Like I want to level up. And so I'm going to apply or I'm going to put myself out there. And I think that's really where a lot of people get stuck is they're like, well, maybe I don't need this. Like maybe I can do without this. Like I can go online, I can order some books. Let me see what's on Amazon. You know what I mean? But I think
Yeah.
all of those elements together, I mean, there's even a difference right now, like I said on Monday, like I teach the lesson. There is a difference in reading a book than having somebody, and you know me, who's energetic and dynamic, like
Mhm.
teaching you the material. And then also giving anecdotes from my own experience as a clinician. There is a different way of learning. And if that's not the way that you learn, that's okay. But I do think that it adds life into like the content and the material. And I think that's really important for retention.
Yeah, I agree. And just going back to what you're talking about with like getting the different perspectives, one thing I didn't think about when I was applying, or I guess I only thought about like the coaching part of coaching, like working
Yeah.
with athletes, doing the run coaching, but there's so many other ways you can contribute. So I didn't think about anything about like I've had my business set up for 3 years. I
Yeah.
have worked through my payment structures, my payment, how I deal with them and stuff like that. And like the very hands-on business stuff, you can contribute that. Or like the setting boundaries one is, very enlightening. And that doesn't have to come from implementing it within coaching. Like we all deal with setting boundaries in our
Right.
daily life. So I think I just want to encourage anyone out there who's like, well, I might not have anything to contribute. It's like, well, you probably do. There's so much
Right.
more than just like working directly with an athlete. And we talk about so many other things in the
Yeah.
collective.
100%. Yeah. No, I love that you say that. I mean, I think that piece is really important to me in the sense that like, you know, I mean, number one, I really want to give in the coaches collective, and the community itself gives just organically and naturally. Um, but so whether you feel almost like you have something to contribute or not, if you feel like you don't have anything to contribute, that's okay. I'm going to give you a lot. Like, and you're going to
Yeah.
get a lot from other coaches too. So give yourself permission to go in, maybe thinking you can't contribute anything. And I think you'll surprise yourself, you know? So just like a permission slip for anyone who's out there who's still like, I really don't though. Like, I really don't have anything to contribute. That's okay. I will fill up your cup with more than enough content. Um, I think you will surprise yourself.
Yeah, I agree. And just like you were saying before, it's all about just being open and willing to receive learning from you and the other coaches. And then,
Yeah.
like, I think it'll organically come about when you know you have something to contribute, or like someone asks a question, you're like, oh, I have a thought about that.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, even in the intensive, like right now, one of our early lessons is about how our past influences the way that we coach now or the way that we want to coach. Like just even talking about your own experience with past coaches, if you've been an athlete and, in earlier days in your life, or if you're an athlete now, like that's contribution, sharing your own story of like, well, yeah, when I came out of college and I decided that I wanted to start running, like I got a coach and that coach was actually like not super helpful because, they didn't take into consideration that I had another job, like whatever it is, like that's contributing. That's
Mhm.
helpful because you're just showing up as you and in your lived experience. And that is enough.
Yeah. And another thing that I really enjoyed about our group is it's so small. There's
Yeah.
how many are in our group? 5?
7.
7? So it's like, so I'm an introvert. And
Uh-huh.
I think I told you this in our interview process. I find it
Uh-huh.
really hard to speak up in group settings because, like, there's usually someone else who's more extroverted and they have no problem always talking. And I'll just sit there and be like, okay, until someone like directly asks me for my opinion or something.
Yeah.
But in this group, well, I think we also had a bit of a quiet group. So
Yes.
I feel like I stepped into the role of the extrovert a lot.
I know.
And I
You
was like, oh,
did.
I have things to say.
Uh-huh.
But all that to say, I think it's just like a very safe space where you feel like you can speak up. And one of the first days, we went over like our expectations, what we're afraid of, all of that. And like a common theme was like, I'm afraid of being judged for how I
Yeah.
coach, what I might say, what I think. And I think you just did a really good job of dispelling that and making us feel like you can say whatever, no one's going to judge you. And like
Yeah.
whatever we say here is not going to leave.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah. Well, and I love that. Like, I love that I mean, that's the other thing too, is when I say like you might surprise yourself, like the other thing that I think is really cool just about like being in a group setting and being in a safe community is that like you might step into a role or like a way of being in the group that's new for you. And I even say this in like the beginning of the group. I say, like, if you're used to leaning in, lean back. And if you're used to leaning back,
Mm.
lean in. And I think it everybody creating that safety. I mean, thank you for the accolades for me, supporting that. And it's everybody. Like everybody's showing up and trusting each other and being vulnerable with each other, I think is really important. And I say stuff that's like, oh, that just came out of my mouth. Or like, I don't know, is that the right thing to say? Like I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I just want to show up as who I am. This is the type of clinician I am. This is the type of person I am. Like this is how I know how to be. But there are totally times where I'm like, oh, foot in mouth for sure. Like that came out. Like I said something last week, even in the winter intensive, where I was like, oh my gosh, like people are going to leave. I cannot believe I said that. So it's a place where you can make mistakes. It's a place where you can be vulnerable. It's a place where you can grow trust in each other. And I think especially sometimes, the coaching world can sometimes be really cutthroat and people can
Mhm.
really judge each other and tear each other down and be critical of other coaches and their approaches. And I think if you can find a safe place where you can show up and that's not going to happen, that's pretty magnificent.
Yeah. Okay, so this is totally not related to Coaches Collective, but I'm curious of your thoughts because I have seen in the running space some coaches very critical of others
Mhm,
publicly,
mhm.
calling people out. And I'm curious why you think they are like that. Do you think it's like a social media thing because more controversial gives you more views and engagement and stuff, or is it like old school thinking, or maybe just their personality? Like, I don't know. I never understand why people have beef with each other because I don't have the
Yeah,
context.
yeah.
So,
I think if I were to put on my psychology hat, which is a hat that I have a hard time taking off, except for when people like say like, "Oh, you're a psychologist, you might know what I'm thinking. You must know what I'm thinking." And I'm like, "That's a psychic. I'm a psychologist. Like, I don't know what you're thinking." Um, I actually think that probably where that criticism and like public shaming comes from is shame. I think
mm,
that if coaches are critical of other coaches in a very public way, in a way that sort of like puts people on blast, so to speak, I actually think probably where it's coming from is a sense of shame in that coach. And shame
mm,
being sort of that feeling that they're not doing enough or that they're unworthy. One of the responses that we have to shame is to shame other people. When we don't feel good enough, we look for other people that we can attack who we feel aren't good enough. And we try to put them down. And so, that's where it's like whenever I see that kind of stuff, and typically, yes, you're going to see it on social media. Um, I really am like, man, that poor coach, like they have got some stuff to work through. Um, because to me, it's really obvious that it's coming from a place of insecurity or from shame. And it's sad, and all humans experience shame. Their way of managing it is just to shame outward, like to shame other people. I think there are other ways to deal with shame, looking for some self-compassion, looking for some empathy, talking to other people about it. But a lot of people don't know that they're in shame, and so they don't know that it's coming from a feeling of not being good enough. But I think that if they were to see a really good therapist, that maybe that could help them. Yeah, I think that's kind of, that's where I think it comes from. I think the other place where I think it comes from, and this also goes along with shame, is this idea of scarcity, that there's not enough athletes out there for me to coach. And so I have to somehow bring other people down so that my pool of athletes who would work with me gets bigger. Usually the opposite happens. Like usually actually your pool of athletes is going to get smaller because people are going to see the way that you're operating is actually not a way of operating with integrity. But I do think that for a lot of coaches, sort of this competitive model of like, if I push people down and prop myself up, I will be able to have access to more athletes. And I think what I would say to any coach out there, even if you are just starting coaching, there's enough to go around. There is enough to go around. Like there are enough athletes in this country and out of this country that want your coaching. And so the way to get athletes into your practice is not to criticize other coaches. That is not the way to do it. I have very strong opinions. You know that. I could go on social media and blast so many mental health providers. It's not even funny. And believe me, sometimes I like fantasize about it. And also it's like, why? Like, what's the point? Like where I spend my energy and attention grows. I want to spend my energy and attention in like growing communities that support each other, not in ripping people down. So I think I think it comes from shame and I think it comes from a place of scarcity. So I'm not enough and I won't have enough.
That makes sense.
What do you think?
Well, after we wrap this up, I'll tell you the very specific situation that I'm thinking about. I have no idea. I mean,
yeah.
They do it in the name of like bettering the coaching profession, which I think is just a front, but I still don't quite know the underlying reason,
Yeah.
But I
I
don't
think,
know them.
Like, there was one time in my practice back at Dallas where I knew that there was another therapist who was saying things about me that were not the kindest things on the planet. And I directly called that therapist and said, like, what's going on here? Like, should we have a conversation? Because I feel like maybe you don't know me. And that was the truth. They didn't know me. They didn't understand what I was doing. Like they didn't, or maybe they understood, but they just had a different opinion. But I think that's the other thing is that like, if coaches are really concerned about what other coaches are doing, get on the phone with them, call them, go directly to them. Like that's actually going to create change. You don't create change by shaming people. That never changes anyone. So that actually usually just has them dig their heels in even more. Yeah. So call them directly, have a conversation.
That makes sense. They might have had conversation. I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about this more after the air.
The coaching world.
I know. It's so funny. It's like it's such a small bubble too.
Yeah.
But they're also not small. We're going to start wrapping this up because you have a meeting and I want you to have some time. Is there anything about the Coaches Collective that we didn't touch on that you want to mention?
I would say there's two things that are kind of new and exciting that are just sort of like bubbling up to the surface right now. So one is that I've created a certification for the Coaches Collective. So once you go through the curriculum and then take like a final exam, and I say that with a big smile because it's like almost laughable to me that I am literally creating an exam. But then you get what's called your certification, your Certified Coaches Collective Coach, so C4. And basically what that signals to athletes who want to work with you or even to other coaches is that you're psychologically informed. You can recognize like behaviors of shame. You know some tactics of motivational interviewing. Like you understand the signs and symptoms of eating disorders, like types of things that I think coaches should know. So that's kind of exciting. And you don't have to get that if you don't want to. Like, it's not a requirement, but if you're interested in acquiring that, you can. And then the other thing that I think is really exciting is that, like, so right now, unlike your cohort that has been running for almost 6 months, like the current cohorts now run for 8 weeks, and it's an intensive program. And then after those 8 weeks, you can roll into what we are now building, which is the All Collective, which is like where all of the coaches from all of the cohorts will live. We will meet every Tuesday, every week. And so, it is a constant area for you, or a consistent area for you to check in if you want to, for you to bring questions, like kind of that ask me anything approach, and just stay connected in the community. So those two things I think are really exciting, like the C4 certification and then the All Collective once you're done with that 8-week program.
Yeah, I'm so excited for the All Collective.
I know, I am too. I'm like dying. I feel like these are all my children and I can't wait for them to meet. Or it's like, when you get married or you have a wedding and you're like, oh my gosh, all the people I love are going to be in the same place at the same time. Like, that is literally how I feel about it. I'm so excited.
I know. It's going to be so fun. So if anyone after hearing this is like, I got to apply, where should they go?
So head over to my website, drlarapence.com, and Lara is Lara, not Laura. And then you can just click on like the coaches tab. That'll bring you to the application. Go ahead and apply. I interview every person that applies. So don't worry so much about like, what do I write and what do I say? And like, do I make it perfect? Because we're going to be having a conversation anyway. And the interview is much more like a chat. Hopefully you can attest to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely head over there. You can always, there are definitely people who have applied, and then I've even sent them an invitation and they've said, yes, actually, sorry, I don't know that I want to do it anymore. I can't for time reasons or financial reasons, but head to the website, click on coaches and apply.
Perfect. I will link that too, so people can just click a link in the show notes, go directly there. I'll also link your Instagram because you post a lot of good content.
Oh, thanks.
It's also funny.
A little snarky.
Yeah. I love it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on, talking about yourself.
Kelly.
And the collective.
I love having you in the collective. You've been such a fantastic addition, and chatting with you is amazing. And yeah, you have contributed a lot. You've been such a joy.
And for anyone that's curious, when I was filling out my application, I said I could contribute social media stuff, and I did not contribute any of that.
And I think I was even like, oh, great. That would be so helpful. And here we are.
I know. I was like, I'm really good at keeping my colors in my grid.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, thank you again. Everything's in the show notes. Everyone apply.
Bye. Thanks, Kelly.